It's funny. It was a long time ago, and I can't remember the details, but I do know that when I got my first job at Wegmans in Western Lights, that at some point I got promoted from cashier to customer service. And man, I felt like a boss. I was in customer service. You know what I mean? Like, you weren't just on a regular old register, just checking people out. You were solving problems. You were selling lotto tickets. You were like, it was like the geek squad of Wegmans. it was pretty special. That was my this changes everything moment. When I got promoted from regular old funky cashier to fancy, sophisticated customer service rep. Man, listen, you couldn't tell me nothing. Everything was different. And that was the kind of moment that happened when Jesus died on the cross. Everything from that moment on was going to be different. Wow, it's so true. And there were some immediate shifts that happened immediately after Jesus died on the cross. And we're going to talk about one of them today. Over these next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about all three of them, but we're going to talk about the first one today. And here's the question. The question is, did you know that before Jesus died on the cross, the vast majority of people did not have direct access to God? It's true. Like only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies behind the veil in the temple and actually have access to God, the presence of God himself. So it was only the high priest. And so the majority of people could not access God. And now we can pray to God right where we are, and He'll always hear us and respond. But it wasn't always like that. So we're going to look at some scripture that shows how, in the aftermath of Jesus' death, we have direct access to God. The first scripture is going to be Exodus 26:31 through 33. Let's look at what that means for us today. If you look at Matthew 27, verses 45 through 54, maybe just 51, it'll give some context for what happened in the crucifixion. It'll give some context to the final seconds of Jesus' life in the immediate aftermath of his death. So I'd like to show you that in a reenactment. So let's just watch a video for that, all right?
There. Father, stay with me. Don't leave me.
All right, now let's get to some bottom line stuff. All right, so wow. So hopefully you guys made it through that. Hopefully you guys weren't, there was a little bit of blood. There was a little bit of like, nakedness. So I'm happy you survived that. I know you weren't expecting that. So thank you. You guys survived a scene from, what's that movie called? The Passion of Christ? That might be from the Passion of Christ. And so the point that I want to emphasize though is that right at the end, the veil is torn. And so That's the same veil from Exodus 26, the same veil or curtain that's meant, it was meant to separate the presence of God from the people. And God didn't want his presence separated from the people. Initially, that wasn't his design, right? Remember when God first created man, he had man in the Garden of Eden. There was no veil, there was no separation, there was community. But because sin entered the world, and because God is so holy, he cannot be in the presence of sin, right? So our own sin is what kept us separated from God's presence. So what happened? What changed? Huh? What changed on the cross? Our own sin separated us from God's presence, but now all of a sudden, God's presence could be around us. What was the big this changes everything moment? Yeah, it was when Jesus died on the cross. When Jesus took our sin upon him and died, there was no longer something that kept us separated from God's presence. And there was no longer a need uh, for God's presence to stay separated behind the veil in the temple. So when the veil of the temple split, that was God's presence saying, like, everyone has access to me now. Wow, that's so good. So how do we apply this in our lives? For that, we got to go to Ephesians 3 and 12. When we place our faith in Jesus and accept the sacrifice he made for us on the cross, we can access God's presence freely. We can go confidently, we can go boldly to God in prayer. We can access him like freely uh, because we put our faith in Jesus. So it's through Jesus's tearing of his body. His body was torn so that the veil could be torn. That's so good.